Well, welcome everybody. Today is September 22nd, 2022. My name is Tiffany Scroggs, and I'm pleased to facilitate today's class on CMMC, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. This is a great class for firms aspiring to do business with DoD, the Department of Defense, or maybe are already doing business with the Department of Defense and need an update as to where we're at with that contractual requirement. So today we're joined by Terry Homburg, a former contracting officer and now a PTEC counselor, very knowledgeable on all things government contracting. We are recording. You were sent the slide deck yesterday morning along with the link. So I hope all of you have that. That's designed to allow you to take notes. If you don't have it, just use the chat function and I'll attach it to the chat, or I'll email it to you if that's easier. Just provide your email in the chat. With that, we have a couple of questions that we'd like you to use the chat for this morning. First question, have you ever attended a CMMC or DoD interim rule on cybersecurity before today? So have you attended a class before? And yes, no answer in the chat would be very helpful for Terry as he walks through his slide deck. Dusty had the chat ready. All right, we got some newbies and some experienced folks. All righty, thank you. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Looks like half and half, Terry.
Looks like we have a split.
We have a split. I love it. Okay, the second question. So we're gonna give it, okay, this is another yes, no question. Number 2, have you ever been or are you now a federal government prime contractor or subcontractor? So you have experience doing business with the feds. We've got Anna. Hey, Anna. Jason's new. Welcome, Jason.
2 yeses, 1 no.
All right. So if you are just now listening in, we're asking if you've done business with the government before, yes or no.
Federal government.
Federal government. All right. And I do realize that my name says Kathy Kokos. I'm not Kathy. I'm filling in for Kathy today, but you can call me Tiffany and I'll rename myself. Hey, Dave. Dave from the U.S. Navy is here today. Welcome, Dave.
Hello, Dave.
All right. I think we got a good split on both of those questions, Terry, if you want to go ahead and take it away.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm looking over the list of attendees. Is Natalie Purvis with us today? Maybe not. Okay. And Dave Walsh is here as a small business liaison officer with the Navy with NAVFAC at Keyport, Washington. And I recognize 2 other people as from an IT company. All right, very good. So hopefully you have printed out this PowerPoint presentation because I would like you to make notes on the presentation for your future reference, and also to jot down any questions because I'm not going to entertain them during the presentation. It's quite long. It's over 40 pages. It's on 2 subjects today. And I'll be covering a lot of the information that you might be asking questions on. So I'm going to have you reserve your questions to the end. This is my full-blown class on the Department of Defense Initiative for Cybersecurity, which includes both CMMC and the DoD interim rule. We'll talk about CMMC first. And the interim rule went into effect December 1st, 2020, going on almost 2 years. So the main emphasis today will be on the DoD interim rule, and I'll explain why in a little bit. And we'll do a post-survey class afterwards to see if there are things that I should have covered and didn't, and things that you didn't need to know. I always like the surveys so I can better improve the class. The last time I taught this class was a year ago, and much has changed in CMMC. So we'll be covering the current CMMC proposed changes and the way it was initiated in January of 2020. So I want to start out with a little trivia, 3 trivia points. The first one, on 60 Minutes, January 31st of 2020, the head of the U.S. counterintelligence stated with 110% confidence, all U.S. citizens' personal information and data has already been hacked. A little scary there. Number 2, there are 2 kinds of companies in the world, those who have been hacked and those are being hacked currently and don't know it. And last, number 3, North Korea has more than 6,000 full-time Army personnel that are full-time hackers. That's scary too. Okay, so before we get started, are there any questions in general? Okay, moving along. So this is probably going to be a full 2-hour presentation. And how come I can't advance my slides? Okay, so our agenda for today is going to give you some background on why the Department of Defense is undertaking this initiative. We're going to present what the DoD CMMC initiative is all about. And remember, CMMC is Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. We'll get into the changes, which is now CMMC 2.0, started out at 1.0. 2.0 was proposed just this past November. We'll talk about the impact on you, the requirements of CMMC, how to go about getting that certification, and then we'll take a pause and we'll get into the second portion, which is the DoD Cybersecurity Interim Rule, which is in effect now. And then we'll go into questions and answers and wrap up with a summary. All right, with all new initiatives, new processes and procedures comes new abbreviations and acronyms. So what I've done on this page is looks like something like orange are the new terms for cybersecurity that the Department of Defense has introduced. So I'm just going to cover the ones that are in orange. The CA is a certified assessor. That's actually the auditor that comes out to do your audit to get your certification in cybersecurity. CMMC, we've been talking about Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. The accreditation body. CUI is controlled unclassified information. We'll be spending some time on that today. C3PAO is the Certified Third-Party Assessor Organization. That's the organization that you'll be entering into a contract with to come out to your facility and do an audit so you can get your certification. That's good for 3 years. And at the bottom is OSC, that's you, the organization seeking a certification, and SPURS, Supplier Performance Risk Assessment System, which is currently part of the DoD interim rule that you have to do a self-assessment and post your score. Some background. The Department of Defense has identified that it loses over $600 billion in trade secrets each year from over 300,000 entities. Keep in mind, the Department of Defense is only one of 15 federal agencies within the executive branch of the government. So if the Department of Defense is losing $600 billion and it's only one of 15, you know, the other agencies are losing trade secrets and getting hacked also. The adversaries are getting more sophisticated every week, every day that goes on. It compromises our troops and warfare fighting capabilities. This really came about because contractors and the federal contracting officers were ignoring DFARS clause 252.204-7012, which was been in contracts for years that required after award a contractor to do an IT assessment and report it to the federal agency. That wasn't being done, and the contracting officers weren't following up on it either. So it was a failure. The next bullet there. So until 2018, companies were required to be qualified after award. And now with the new initiative, you are required to be certified prior to award in order to get a contract. Another little trivia point here is that it only takes $2,000 to purchase the software to crack a password. When I saw this a couple of years ago, when I started putting this class on, that was really surprising. I didn't know that. It only takes $2,000 to buy the software to crack a password. So the DoD wants to avoid these risks from cyber attacks. Universities are great centers for hackers because a lot of innovation comes from our universities. Last tidbit here is that typically on average, it takes 205 days to identify that an IT system's been compromised. And that's the companies getting hacked, whether you're a subcontractor, a prime contractor, or a federal agency. And 69% of the time, the entity only becomes aware of it is because the FBI comes knocking on your door and tells you that you've been hacked. And 89% of those companies were not cyber secure compliant. So all scary information. So some recent examples. March of 2020, some of our largest Department of Defense contractors were among dozens of companies named as victims in a compromised data access through a subcontractor in Colorado. So a subcontractor to these prime contractors was hacked, and the hacker was able then to go up to the prime contractors and download drawings, intellectual property, state secrets. In June of 2020, a Chinese military officer was caught leaving the United States with research materials from the University of California after lying on an application to obtain a visitor's visa for a work-study exchange program. So this is just examples of stuff that's going on all the time. The most recent example that I have is the last bullet there. In December of 2020, Russia hacked into the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Treasury, Commerce, and Fortune 500 companies. You may recall this being on the news. It was called SolarWinds. It was uploaded in March and April of 2020, and 18,000 entities in the United States use SolarWinds software. And the hack was discovered by a third-party private company called FireEye as a private security company, and they reported to the federal agency. So they're still trying to recover and assess the damage done from the SolarWinds. So here I've got an example of losing state secrets and intellectual property. Here's a picture of the latest US jet fighter, the F-35, versus the Chinese model called the J-31. The F-35 was first produced in 2006 for $78 million each. It took years of research and development. The Chinese hacked into our agencies and prime contractors, and thus, as a result, saved all that time and money in doing the research and development. They stole the blueprints and are now making their version of the US's F-35 jet fighter, and they're producing their planes for $31 million less. Take a close look at the pictures. There's only two differences between those planes. The one on the left has a spire on the nose, and the one on the right only has one jet engine. The one on the right is the US F-35 jet fighter. The one on the left is the Chinese model J-31. Fortunately, the Chinese model, they are having problems with their jet engines. Other than that, they're spitting images of each other. The same can be said about aircraft carriers. So prior to this loss, the Chinese were able to hack into US companies, federal agencies, and steal the blueprints of our current aircraft carriers. And if you see a picture of a Chinese aircraft carrier, it looks very much like ours. So once again, they save all the years of research and development. They let the United States design it, they steal it, and they make it themselves. As a result, the Department of Defense is the first federal agency to undertake this cybersecurity initiative. Department of Defense has said that this is the largest undertaking of any initiative in its entire existence. So what they want to do is restrict and control. They want to secure over 300,000 contractors, DoD and non-DoD suppliers, information systems and networks. They want to codify cybersecurity, the processes, practices, and assessment standards. They want to have enforcement, supply chain accountability to protect the DoD intellectual property, and introduce cybersecurity maturity model certification, CMMC, which they initiated in January of 2020. So the Department of Defense came out with CMMC. We called it 1.0. It started January 30th of 2020. The accreditation body was established that same year in June. Department of Defense decided to make it a 5-year rollout. So starting in January 2020, 5 years to figure out the process and procedures, the assessments, the certifications, so on and so forth. Throughout the presentation, you'll see the red asterisks. Those I've identified as the Department of Defense is proposed changes in those areas, and we will talk about those. So under what they call now CMMC 2.0, these are changes. So what I want to do is talk about 1.0, which is in place now, and talk about the proposed changes that were initiated this past November. That's going to take up to 2 years to implement. So CMMC is in a state of flux right now. Initiated in January of 2020 with a set of processes and procedures, and Department of Defense just this past November has proposed numerous changes already. So we'll talk about those. We'll talk about the proposed changes, but they're not in effect yet. It can take up to 2 years for them to go into effect, and I'll talk about that later in this presentation. So our bigger emphasis is what's in effect now, which is the DoD interim rule, which will be the second part of this presentation. So under 1.0, there are 5 levels, levels 1 through 5, 1 through 3 being the most common. The Department of Defense has said 60 to 70% of all contractors, DoD contractors, will be at level 1. Level 3 is for requirements that have CUI, controlled unclassified information. Level 1 is just basic everyday security hygiene. You should already have that in place, and you should easily be able to meet the requirements for level 1 certification. It will require a third-party certification. As I mentioned before, he will be entering into a contract with a C3 PAO. They will request some information before they come on site, and then they will come on site and conduct an audit of your IT system. And keep in mind, it's more than just IT software. It is also your physical security. Do you lock your windows at night? Do you lock your door to your office? Do you secure CUI, controlled unclassified information, in a safe or in a locked drawer, whatnot? So it's more than just IT software, but it's also physical security for your office. Certification process has started and auditors are available now. All right, so the current status of CMMC. CMMC certification is required to award a contract. You have to have your certificate in hand in order to be awarded the contract. Remember, this is in the 5-year rollout. We're in finishing our 2nd year. These requirements won't go into effect, as you see in the 3rd bullet there, until 1 October 2025. The red asterisk is there because the proposed change for 2.0 is that once it goes through the entire process, which can take up to 24 months, they are proposing that will go into effect the next day. So, for example, if November of 2020, 24 months would be November of 2022. I got that right? No, this past November. The proposed changes are November of 2021. And if they take the full 24 months to implement, then that will be November of 2023. And if the proposed change gets accepted and goes into effect, CMMC will start appearing in solicitations and contracts probably the following day. And that will be then 2 years prior to the 1 October 2025, which is in effect now. So going back to the 2nd bullet there, no solicitations will be issued with cybersecurity requirements in them during the 5-year rollout, unless it's approved by the Undersecretary of Defense for acquisition and sustainment. There's still a lot of unknowns on how the certifications and assessments will happen. All the practices and requirements are laid out for the contractors to start implementing in the publication called NIST Special Publication 800-171A. So actually you can start getting ready for that by just going to that publication and reviewing the 110 controls and getting your cybersecurity getting in step with cybersecurity. The accreditation body is currently training C3 PAOs, and as of a couple of days ago, I checked, and there are 23 auditors that have been vetted, have been trained, certified for you to enter into a contract. These companies are throughout the United States. I did check to see if there are any in the state of Washington. There isn't. The closest one is in California for the West Coast. And audits, certifications are available now. So here's a slide on the proposed changes. The proposed changes were initiated just this past November of 2021. The changes need to go through the public comment period and the rulemaking process, which can take 9 to 24 months. Once the changes are codified, CMMC requirements will be in solicitations and resulting contracts. Keep in mind that there are a number of other executive branch agencies that are watching the DoD rollout, and if it is successful, all the executive branch federal agencies will be having cybersecurity requirements in their solicitations and their follow-on contracts. And a number of months ago, maybe 6 to 12 months ago, it's already been identified that the states are going to follow suit too. Cybersecurity is a big thing. It's not a flash in the pan. It's here. We just need to get on board and protect our information, especially controlled unclassified information. Part of 2.0 is that the DoD will publish a comprehensive cost analysis for each level of CMMC 2.0. So how much is it going to cost you, the contractor, to get certified at level 1? How much is it going to cost to get certified at level 2? And how much is it going to cost you to get certified at level 3? And why do I say 1, 2, and 3 is because the next bullet says that the Department of Defense has proposed changing the 5 levels in 1.0 to 3 levels in 2.0. Level 1 still be level 1, but it won't require a third-party auditor to come in. So you won't have to hire somebody to come in for a level 1 certification. They're proposing that it will be a self-certification, just like the interim rule. The new level 2 will be the old level 3. So that will be a certification requirement if the solicitation to follow on contract deals with CUI, controlled unclassified information. So keep in mind when we talk about CUI, it's either the agency is requiring you, and as a result of the solicitation, the contract, you're going to be creating CUI, or if you are a contractor that holds and processes CUI. Either way, you'll be at the new level 2 under CMMC 2.0. Okay, the compliance drivers. So it's been in many of the federal contracts since June of 2016 when the FAR clause was last revised. It's FAR clause 52.204-21, which is equivalent to the CMMC level 1 requirements. I've provided here the website for you to learn more about the FAR clause requirements. If you have a Department of Defense contract, then you will see the DFARS clause, which is covered defense information. It's clause number 252.204-7012, which was last updated in December of 2019. It requires adequate security, which is the equivalent of what's currently in NIST SP 800-171, which is in its second revision right now. And the clause requires that if you have an incident, a hacking, that there is a reporting requirement identified in that clause. And I provided the website for you to read about that clause also. So from any federal contract, it may have the FAR clause, which is the first one, called Federal Contract Information. And if it's a Department of Defense contract, it will have the DFARS clause, which is the second one down below. I have a summary page later on in the class here where I will identify all the cybersecurity clauses and call them out for you. So you can have them all in one place. Then you can look through your solicitations and follow on contracts and be able to identify the clauses. Okay, so at the FAR level, which is what we were just talking about on the previous page, requires 17 safeguards. 15 of the subparagraphs in that clause comprise the 17 basic requirements for all government contractors to protect the federal contract information and non-public data generated by or for a contract. These 17 safeguards are in the NIST special publication, and they constitute all of the CMMC level 1 practices. Little information about the NIST special publication 800-171, now in its second revision. It was published in February of 2020. NIST refers to the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It governs controlled unclassified information in the non-federal information systems and organizations. So it helps the federal government successfully carry out its designated mission. And if you or another company that you work with has a contract with a federal agency, you must be compliant with this policy. NIST special publication 800-171 constitutes the CMMC level 1 requirements. And I've provided the website there for you also. A little little information about the difference between the NIST 800-171, which is for controlled unclassified information, versus CMMC. So in the NIST instruction, it's the current requirement. It's for DoD contractors that process or store CUI. As I mentioned earlier, you're subject to the current level 3 under 1.0, or under the new proposed 2.0 would be level 2, requiring you to have a certification because one of two things. One, the solicitation of follow-on contract will ultimately have you producing CUI, or number two, you are a company that holds or processes CUI. Maybe nothing to do with the solicitation or contract, but you're a company that has CUI. So in either case, you'll need that certification for the current level 3 or the new proposed level 2. So the NIST instruction talks about a plan of action and milestones, how to meet the CUI 110 controls, perform a self-assessment and submit your score to the Department of Defense, and Defense Contract Management Agency conducts the audits with the DoD assessment methodology. As opposed to CMMC, CMMC is for all contracts. NIST is only for requirements that have CUI. CMMC, the requirement for certification will be for all contracts. In order to get a Department of Defense contract, you will have to have a certification at one of the levels. There's CMMC has 17 practices. Also known as controls. For level 3, there's 130 practices. All the practices must be implemented. So, for example, on level 1, there's 110 controls that you need to meet. If you meet 109 of them, you don't get your certification. You have to meet all 110 controls for level 1. You have to meet all the additional 20 practices at level 3 for 130 practices. So, for example, if you get audited and you are seeking a level 3 certification, there's 130 practices that you have to meet. 110 at level 1 and additional 20 for level 3. If the auditor determines that you don't meet one of the controls for the 110 for level 1, but you meet the additional 20 for level 3, then you don't get your certification because you have to meet all 130 practices. On the other hand, if you are seeking a level 3 certification and you meet all of the level 110 controls, but you're missing one in the additional 20 for the level 3 certification, you can get your level 1 certification, but you won't be able to get your level 3 certification. And in red there, I put all DoD contractors will need to have the certification, and that includes subcontractors at all tiers. And CMMC 1.0, the initial initiative, there was no self-assessment. So under NIST 800, it's a self-assessment. Under CMMC, there's no self-assessment. It's a third party that you have to enter into a contract with and have them come out and do an audit with you under CMMC 1.0, which is one of the changes, because under the proposed changes by the Department of Defense under 2.0, level 1 would be a self-assessment, not having to hire a third party and come in and do an audit to see that you meet the 110 controls to get your level 1 certification. So that's a proposed change. Impact on you. You have to pay to play with the Department of Defense, and in the future, all federal agencies. Department of Defense going on 2 years ago said that level 1 will cost a contractor about $1,000 over a 3-year period, most of the costs up front to get certified. And for level 3, about $51,000. But remember I said earlier that under CMMC proposed change 2.0, one of the proposed changes is that the Department of Defense is actually going to come out with a cost estimate for contractors for each of the new proposed 3 levels, level 1, 2, and 3. The impact on you requires a third-party audit and certification prior to award. And we just talked about the proposed change is that level 1 will not require a third-party audit. It'd be a self-assessment and posting it up to the internet, the results of your self-assessment. CAs, those are the auditors, will most likely charge by the hour plus their travel costs. So it's recommended that you ask for estimates. There are a number of C3PAOs out there, as I mentioned earlier. You can contact a number of them. You know, the closer they are to you, the less expensive it's going to be because they'll save time in travel costs. Their hourly rates could be different also. So always ask for an estimate. In the past, a recurring question was, well, how are contractors going to get compensated for this additional cost to get a cybersecurity certification? Department of Defense says, you know, you can't put it in as a direct cost line item in your proposal. Where you can put it is in your indirect costs, your overhead expenses, as it will be an allowable expense. So you get reimbursed through your overhead, your indirect costs. Subcontractors will have the same CMMC level requirement as the prime contractor or lower. So an example that I like to use is a solicitation is issued and it says it's level 3. It has CUI in it. And the follow-on contract will have the same requirement in it. But the prime contractor can't do everything that's in the solicitation, so they're going to subcontract out a portion of it. The portion that they subcontract out could potentially be the same CMMC level 3 requirement, or it could be less than that. So the example might be they're building a building with a secure room in it for reviewing classified messages. Well, part of building a building is putting in a parking lot or doing the grounds, landscaping. So the contractor, who is a construction company, doesn't do a parking lot, and they don't do the grounds maintenance. So they're going to subcontract out those two as 2 separate subcontracts, one to a parking lot paving company and another subcontract for installing landscape. Well, those are not, there's no CUI in those. So those subcontracts will be classified as CMMC 1.0, or excuse me, level 1. And so the subcontractors don't need a level 3 certification. They only need a level 1 certification, but they do need a certification in order to be awarded the subcontract. Okay. Any questions on that? Jot that down and we'll address those at the end of the class. Prime contractors are responsible for all subcontractor tiers. No matter how many tiers you have, the prime contractor is responsible for all the subcontractors. The prime contractor cannot award a subcontract to a company that does not have a certification. All companies in the DoD supply chain will need cybersecurity certifications, regardless of what level it is. One under the current is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And under the new proposed changes, it will be levels 1, 2, and 3. There'll be increased non-compliance penalties and risks, including loss of the current and future contracts, personal and corporate liability, and negative company brand. There are exceptions to the certifications, the need to get a certification, and they are COTS and the micro purchases. COTS is commercial off the shelf. So the example that I give is an agency is soliciting to purchase, say, 20 laptops. And so the supply companies out there go to different manufacturers, say they go to IBM and get a quote for 20 laptops. They get the quote, they submit it to the agency. The agency typically is going to award to the lowest price. They award to you, a supply company, for those 20 laptops, and you go to IBM, you purchase them, and you pass them on to the federal agency. You made no changes to the laptop. It was readily available, that laptop, to anybody in private industry. You could go to any retail store and buy that laptop. That is commercial off the shelf. It's available commercially, and there's no dollar limit on that. It can be a $1,000 purchase, a $1 million purchase, a $100 million purchase. If it's COTS, it is exempt from having to be a certified, that you don't need to have a CMMC cybersecurity certification because it's COTS. The other is micro purchases. If you are a company and all of your sales are less than $10,000, or this particular sale is less than $10,000, it comes under the micro purchase threshold, which is currently $10,000. You are not subject to having to have a cybersecurity certification. It is one of the exceptions. Okay, any questions on that? Jot that down and we'll talk about it at the end of the class. Requirements of CMMC. So it was created from over 10 information protection and industry standards. The model addresses everything from asset control to systems and information integrity. And as I mentioned earlier, also includes physical security. So there's 17 domains. There's 5 processes across 5 levels. Remember, that's under CMMC 1.0, 5 levels. The new proposed changes, 3 levels. 171 practices across 5 levels to measure technical capabilities. Includes 5 maturity levels. Level 1 is basic computer hygiene. It's everyday basic cybersecurity. It's 110 controls at the federal level. Level 2 is intermediate cybersecurity. Most IT companies will need to be at level 2 at a minimum, quite often level 3, depending on what it is that they're providing to the federal agency. Level 3 is good cybersecurity. So that is when there is CUI, controlled unclassified information, and there is 130 controls. So at level 1, there's 110, till going to a level 3 is an additional 20 controls for a total of 130 for controlled unclassified information. Levels 4 and 5 are classified as proactive and advanced cybersecurity. Department of Defense has said there's probably less than a handful of companies in the United States that are going to need to be at levels 4 and 5. 5 or 6 companies, and they haven't really identified those yet either. So what we're really talking about is levels 1, 2, and 3 under cybersecurity 1.0. Each maturity level includes all the prior levels, domains, capabilities, practices, and processes. This is where I was talking about earlier, when if you're going for level 3, you need to meet all the controls for level 1, plus the additional controls for level 3. If you don't meet any one of those, regardless, if it's level 1 or level 3, you don't get your certification. You have to meet all of them. It's all or none. So the Department of Defense plans on adding additional practices and procedures to the standards. And overall, the number is going to grow to 479 in 2025. Haven't seen any of those new controls yet. Department of Defense is saying that they are going to add additional practices. So the next few pages are some tables presenting the information in different ways. So here's requirements of CMMC. You look at the second column there, identifies the levels 1 through 5. The next column, practices, identifies the number of practices that you need to meet for each of those CMC levels. So for example, level 1, there's 17 practices. Level 2, there's 55 practices and 2 processes. Level 3 is 58 practices and 1 process. Over in the far right-hand column, I've identified the types of companies or industries that will need to be at the various levels. So level 1, typically grounds maintenance, janitorial. There's no CUI. Level 2, some IT companies. Level 3 is all requirements that have controlled unclassified information, and a lot of IT companies who provide coding software are going to follow into that CUI, because that's not information that we want revealed to our adversaries. The maturity levels. So as I mentioned before, you have to meet everything at each. If you're going, for example, level 3, you have to meet all the requirements for level 2 and level 1 in order to get that certification. So here is the display for, in the far left-hand column, maturity level 1, which is performed. You perform the practice. So you have nothing to show for it. You just tell the auditor, yes, we do it. 17 safeguards. Level 2 is it's documented. So so under the second column, you see that you perform the practice, and in red is and have written processes and policy. So in the nutshell, in the third column, it's you do it and you document it. Go on to maturity level 3, it's managed. So you perform in practice from level 1, and level 2, you have written processes and policies. And the additional requirement for level 3 managed is that you establish, maintain, and you resource a plan demonstrating the management of the activities for the practices, implementation, to include the information on missions, goals, plans, resourcing, so on and so forth. So in a nutshell, you see where I'm going is that it's additive. So you do it, you document it, and now for level 3, you demonstrate the resources for it. And that's how you read this chart. So it's all additive. CMC by the numbers. So across the top from left to right are the levels. Level 1 is basic, level 2 is intermediate, kind of a gray area. Department of Defense hasn't really identified who would be in level 2. Level 3 is good, and so that's for all requirements that have CUI in them. And level 4 is the proactive, and level 5 is the advanced. And it's the gray area. They're not sure which companies are going to need to get certified at level 4 or 5, but they have identified, the Department of Defense has identified that it's probably only going to be half a dozen companies in the entire United States. So looking at the last row at the bottom, it says what. So level 1 is 17 practices, level 2 is 72 practices, level 3 is 130 practices. All right, so early on, I said that we'll be talking about CUI. So how do you know what is CUI? So I provided the website there if you really want to learn what CUI is and you have problems sleeping at night. I provided the website there for you to learn everything about controlled, unclassified information. One of the sources is Department of Defense Instruction 5200.48, titled Controlled Unclassified Information. So CUI will be identified in the Security Classification Guide to ensure protection of that information. What you really need to know is that you don't need to determine whether a solicitation follow-on contract has CUI in it or it does not. It is the agency to identify whether there is CUI. So the program office or the requiring activity must identify the Department of Defense controlled unclassified information in the solicitations and the resulting contract. So that was a question that we got on a recurring basis the first year. Well, how do I know reading the solicitation whether there's CUI in it and I need to be at level 3 certification, or there's no CUI and I only need to be at level 1 certification? It is up to the federal agency to identify in the solicitation and the follow-on contract that there is CUI in it. It's the agency's responsibility to make that determination, not yours. So, good news. So here I've provided some examples of controlled technical information, which is CUI. So you can see architect engineering companies, their products are on here. It's research and engineering data, engineering drawings, specifications, manuals, technical reports. You'll see IT companies on there, computer software, executable code, and source code. Also studies and analysis. These are all examples of CUI. This is a new page that I've put in this presentation I didn't have before. Here I've identified some NAICS codes that are CUI. So 236220. So everybody knows what a NAICS code is. It's a 6-digit number that identifies your industry that you're selling products or services. So 236220 is building construction. 541330 is engineering, followed by computer services and facility support services. So typically, if a solicitation and contract are issued with these NAICS codes, it's CUI. All right, so here's a page showing the hierarchy. At the top is the Department of Defense, going down to the accreditation body. The accreditation body is a nonprofit independent organization. It is not part of any federal agency. Department of Defense decided early on to make it a third-party accreditation body. Then it goes down to the C3PAO, which is the Certified Third-Party Assessor Organization. It's a commercial company. They are the ones that you enter into a contract with for them to come out and send out a CA, a certified assessor, to conduct the audit. And if you pass it, then you get a certification issued by the C3PAO that is good for 3 years, unless you have a violation, and then your certification is withdrawn and you start over again. So then it goes to the CA, the certified assessor. So certified assessors can be employees of the company for the C3PAO, or they could be subcontracted entities providing audits. And lastly is you, the OSC, the organization seeking certification. It's you, it's your company. And then at the end there, you see the arrow going up to the C3PAO, because that is who you contact to enter into a contract to get an audit. And they send out the certified assessor. Moving on. So here's the journey, 7 steps. So your company, your leadership needs preparation and alignment to learn and understand the CMMC model and the applicable requirements and the impacts on your organization. What you're doing now is step number 1. You are learning about CMMC. Number 2 is determine what level that you need to be at. Identify your current regulated data. FCI, CUI, ITAR, so on and so forth. What level that you want or need to be at, level 1, level 2, level 3, so on. Number 3 is identify the gaps in your cybersecurity. Number 4 is remediate those gaps, close them up, get rid of the gaps. Number 5 is prepare for the audit. Number 6 is enter into a contract with the C3 PAO to come out and do an audit to get your certification, which is good for 3 years. I have provided here the website for the accreditation body for you to find your C3 PAO of your choice, and it is cyberab.org. And then you go on that website and click on the marketplace, and you can find the C3 PAOs. And lastly, post your audit performance. Performing ongoing compliance program practices and procedures, adherence, and resiliency activities. So once you go through the process of identifying what's CMMC certification level that you want to obtain, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, get your cybersecurity house in order, get contracted with a C3 PAO. They come out and do your audit. Their audit on you. You pass, you get your certification. It's good for 3 years. It's good for 3 years until you have a violation. And then your certification is taken away and you start over again. Okay, moving on. Okay, the benefits. Reduce cyber risk, prevent unauthorized disclosure to protect EAR information from being disclosed to unauthorized entities and individuals, requires compliance program, provides a framework that enforces a systematic compliance program that's good enough for the Department of Defense and just demonstrates a reasonable due care and diligence. You can then compete with large business, improves your competitive position to compete with larger competitors as you have that cybersecurity certification. And lastly, it builds trust and relationship with the Department of Defense. And in the future, all federal agencies, and after that, states also will be following suit. All right, so the next 5 or so pages are the requirements. And this page and next page is the requirements for level 1. So I put them in on paper here for you to refer to in the future. So remember that we're talking about the FAR clause 52.204-21. So this can be not only Department of Defense, but all federal agencies, the FAR clause. So this is at the Federal Acquisition Regulation level, the top level for all federal agencies, which is level 1. Remember that there's the exception of COTS. If what you sell is commercial off the shelf, you are not subject to having to get this audit and certification. But for those of you that don't have this exception for COTS, which comes under FAR Part 12, then these are the level 1 requirements. So looking down through here, the very first one, identify, report, and correct information and information system flaws in a timely manner. So over on the far right, the column is also known as patch your IT stuff. So keep your malware software, your passwords current, revolving. Anytime a software has an update to it, that you are implementing the update. Don't fall behind on the latest version of malware cybersecurity software. The third one down, update code protection mechanisms when new releases are available. That was what I was just talking about. Also known as update your antivirus software. And the next bullet is related to that. Perform periodic scans and information systems and real-time scans, also known as use the antivirus software that you have on your computer system. This is basic computer hygiene. That is what level 1 is. This is what everybody should already be doing. Okay. Next page is the remainder of the level 1 requirements. Halfway down there, limit information system access to the types of transactions and functions that that authorized users are permitted to execute, also known as the least privilege. So control access to your computer hard drives or the cloud or whatever that you're using to only those that have a need to know. And to have those passwords changed every so often. Okay, so that's level 2. Level 3. So this is the first page of level 3 requirements. So the first one there, define the procedures for handling controlled unclassified information, also known as do all the stuff that's in NIST 800-171. So the NIST special publication 800-171 has all the information for controlled unclassified information. The third one down, employ a security assessment of enterprise software that has been developed internally for internal use and that has been organizationally defined as an area of risk, also known as execute software peer review and static code analysis. So we have 2 more pages of these. The reason why I'm doing or presenting this for you, because you've got a copy of this PowerPoint presentation. You'll be able to refer to it in the future. You can go through and start identifying what you're going to need for level 1 and what you might need for level 3. And then you can also go to NIST Special Publication 800-171A and actually see these requirements and fill in the gaps, what you're not meeting, get those conquered, and then you're getting ready to meet the requirements for level 1 and possibly level 3, and then you can get your certification. That's good for 3 years. So this is page 2 of level 3 requirements, and the third page for level 3 requirements. Actually, there's 4 pages for level 3. Okay. All right, so the CMMC assessment process. The organization seeking certification, OSC, as I identified earlier, that is you, the company. You are the OSC. You'll submit a request for the assessment, which is which you will be entering into a contract with the C3PAO to obtain a CMMC assessment. So to find a C3PAO, provide the website here for you. It's cyberab.org. You'll go to Marketplace, and on the left-hand side, under Ecosystem Role, you'll select C3PAO, and you will find all the certified and qualified vetted C3PAOs that are currently doing business. And you'll see where they are located by state. And as I said earlier, I did this 2 days ago and found that the closest one to the state of Washington is in California. So the second step there is the C3PAO will assign 1 or more CAs to conduct the assessment. The C3PAO and the CA may be the same company or person. Keep in mind, so when I said there are 1 or more CAs, it depends on how large your organization is and how many satellite offices you have. So for example, if your headquarters is in Seattle, Washington, but you have an office in Portland and another one in Denver, Colorado, then it's going to require most likely more CAs to come out to do the audit. They're going to be 1 at each location. Or maybe they'll send out 1, but it's going to take longer because they're going to go to Seattle, Washington to your headquarters, and then they're going to go to Portland, and then they're going to go to Denver, Colorado. So just keep in mind that you're going to be paying for their hourly rate and their travel costs. Number 3, the CA will conduct the assessment on behalf of the C3PAO. Number 4, the C3PAO will report the results to the accreditation body who reviews it for accuracy and completeness. Number 5, if you pass muster, and the accreditation body is not objecting to anything, then the C3PAO will issue the certificate for whatever level that you are going after, and it's good for 3 years unless there's a violation. Number 6, the accreditation body will handle any adjudication actions where the OSC, disagrees with the findings of the CA or the C3PAO. Keep in mind, though, do not expect the adjudications to be a timely process, and they will give you an interim pass finding until the adjudication is completed. So, for example, you hire a C3PAO, they send out a CA, and you want a level 3, you're going for a level 3 certification. So they're going to check 130 practices, 110 for level 1, plus the additional 20 for a total of 130 for level 3. And during the audit, the auditor finds that one of the 20 for level 3, you are not in compliance, but you disagree with them. So under this number 6 here, the accreditation body may agree with the auditor and the C3PO that you weren't in compliant, you disagree, you go through adjudication in the process. They will give you an interim pass for that level 3 certification until the end of the adjudication. The adjudication can end up in one of 2 ways. One, the C3 of the accreditation body agrees with the auditor that you didn't meet the requirements for that one control, and then your interim pass is pulled and you don't get your certification. You might get a certification for level 1 because you met all of the 110 controls, but you won't get your certification for level 3. So then you'll need to start the process over, fix it, contact a C3PAO, enter into a contract, and have the audit process start over again. If the adjudication ends up where they disagree with the auditor in your favor, then they will issue you a certification, and you'll have your 3-year certification for level 3. So that's the adjudication process. All right, so here's a little, this page and the next page are some of the proposed changes. So it was initiated in November of 2021, that is just this last November. It will take 9 to 24 months to implement. We are currently in the public comment stage, and there are 2 stages after that. The rulemaking stage is the final step. So it just depends on how many months it's going to take to go through each of the stages. And as it says there, it takes 9 to 24 months. Shortly after the Department of Defense proposed these changes, which are calling CMMC 2.0, another federal agency disagrees with what the DoD is doing in these changes. It's the Department of Homeland Security, the IT, head of their IT, disagrees with the proposed changes. So now I've been in the federal procurement world 29 years. In all my years, I see the agencies, and I work for the Department of Defense, go through these initiatives and changes, and they go through these steps. The first one being public comment, and the rulemaking is the last one, and all the proposed identified processes never come out the same at the end. And so all of these proposed changes, I can say with confidence, are not going to be implemented after the 9 to 24 months, however long it takes. Some of them will be modified, some of them will be deleted, and there could be some new ones that are added to it. So that's why we say it's in flux right now, and we're not saying definitely the 2.0 is the way it's going to be. We do know that 1.0 was introduced a couple of years ago. So a lot of people like myself, when we're presenting this, we're there's nothing concrete right now. It's in flux, it's in change. And so we can't say this is the way it is, it's 2.0, because it has not been implemented yet. Next page, this is 5 and 6. So number 5, some proposed changes. As I talked about earlier, 1.0 has 5 levels. 2.0, the proposed changes is 3 levels. Level 1 is the 17 requirements. It's the fundamental. Level 2 is the 110 controls, 320 objectives. It's the old level 3, and it's called the advanced. And the top level will be level 3, which is NIST 800-171 plus -172. It's the old levels 4 and 5, which is classified as expert. And as I mentioned before, there's only a handful of companies in the entire United States that are going to be at level 3. So level 2 is CUI, controlled unclassified information. And if there is no CUI, then it's level 1. And the Department of Defense said 60 to 70% of the supply chain Department of Defense contractors will be at level 1. So $1,000 to get certified at level 1. It's basic computer hygiene. You should already be doing it. You should easily be able to get your level 1 certification. Level 1 in the proposed change is self-certification. You won't even have to go out to a C3PO, enter into a contract, and have them come out and do an assessment. It's going to be a self-assessment. You go through the 110 controls, you do a self-assessment, and you post your score up on the internet, and you're done. Good for 3 years. Level 2, it will be audited by C3PAO. It will go into effect when it goes through the last step. It will go into effect that next day, as opposed to waiting for the 5-year rollout to complete, which is 1 October 2025. The proposed change is once it's implemented, it will start effective immediately. So this could be 2 years earlier than 2025. It could be 2023. And the proposed change is that DoD is going to provide a cost estimate to you, the contractor, of what it potentially will cost to get certified at level 1 and level 2. And number 6, there are other proposed changes also. So lots of changes. And like I said earlier, I would bet dollars to donuts that all of these changes will not be implemented as proposed. So here I've identified organizations to help contractors like yourself. If you are not an IT person, or you don't have an IT person in your company, or you haven't outsourced it, hired a company to provide IT support for you, here are 4 organizations that can help you get through and get ready for an audit. And the very first one is Project Spectrum. That's what PTAC organizations will refer you to, but there are also 3 other ones there. And I provided their websites for you to go there and find out which one that you would like to select if you need help from another source. All right, so let's take a pause here. Everything that we've covered now is CMMC. The next is going to be the DoD interim rule. Okay, let's move on to the DoD interim rule. So one of the things that I hear over and over again is companies asking me questions, and they are intermingling CMMC with the interim rule. They are 2 separate things. CMMC is in the 5-year rollout, goes into effect 1 October 2025, or maybe sooner, 2023. The DoD interim rule is in effect now and has been for over a year. And that is the one that you really need to pay attention to, because we don't know what CMMC is because it's in a state of flux, but the DoD interim rule is in place now, and you have to meet it if you want to do business with the Department of Defense. So let's get into the DoD interim rule. Here's a page. It says the DoD interim rule went into effect December 1st of 2020. So we're approaching 2 years now where this has been in place. It applies only to requirements that have controlled unclassified information. Does not apply to COTS or micro purchases. Remember, micro purchase threshold is $10,000. So if what you sell is less than $10,000, you're not subject to the DoD interim rule. Nor if you sell COTS, commercial off the shelf, you're not subject to the interim rule. So the two clauses for the DoD interim rule are, because it's DoD, they are DoD clauses. It's DFARS 204-7019 and 7020. The titles are there. They went into effect, or the clauses were created in November of 2020. And the interim rule went into effect December 1st of 2020. So the interim rule, the prime and subcontractors have to have a cybersecurity assessment performed and recorded prior to awarding a contract to them. So if you are a prime contractor and you are needing to subcontract some of the requirements of your contract, your subcontractors will need to have a cybersecurity self-assessment and post it up to the internet in order for you to award a subcontract to them, unless they meet one of the exceptions, like we just talked about, COTS and micro purchases. Assessments may be classified as basic, medium, or high. Basic is you do the self-assessment and post it up to the internet. There are a small percentage of companies that will need a medium or a high assessment. And then it will be DCMA, Defense Contract Management Agency, that will conduct that assessment. So the basic is performed by your company using the NIST SP 800-171A, which has the 110 controls. If it is a medium or high, it will be performed by DCMA and recorded by DCMA up on the internet. There'll be very few companies that need this. You post your assessment online at SPURS through an account at PIEE. I provide the website there for you. If you do not currently have a login and password to PIEE, you'll need to go to that website, request a login and password. That can take anywhere from 4 hours to 48 hours to get your login and password. And then you go into PIEE and click on SPURS. PIEE is an accumulation of a number of applications. One of them is SPURS, and SPURS is where you will record your self-assessment score. Your score can range from a -220 to a positive 110. The 110 is the 110 controls. There is a tool that I give out to clients like you. It's an Excel spreadsheet. It has the 110 controls. You start out with a maximum score of 110, and as you answer each weighted question, no, your score comes down. And if you answered all the 110 controls as no, your score would be a -220. Because as I said, the questions are weighted in importance. So once you complete your self-assessment and you post it up to SPURS, it's good for 3 years. But you'll probably, on a continuing basis, go into SPURS and update your information. Because if you didn't get a perfect 110 score, then you will be working on mitigating your gaps to achieve 110 sometime in the future. So as you mitigate those gaps and your score improves, so maybe your first assessment is a 70. You got a positive score of 70. So you're missing a few things because the best score is 110. So over time, whether it's weeks or months, you mitigate the gaps and your score now is 75. Well, you can go back into SPURS and update and enter your new score of 75. Your old score will remain there. And maybe in 2 months, your score then goes to 95. So you go back into SPURS and you enter your next score, the date, and your score of 95. Upcoming slide is the questions in SPURS. There's like 7 of them that you'll have to answer to record your score. So you'll be going to SPURS on a regular basis, improving your score until you get to 110. It's possible, the second to last bullet there is that some solicitations, maybe now, I haven't heard of any, or in the future, may identify a minimum score requirement. Haven't seen any yet, but potentially that's out there. So what that means is if an agency issues a solicitation, they may say in there that it has CUI and it's not COTS, and they know that it's less than 10, that it's greater than $10,000, that the minimum score needs to be 75. So if your score in SPURS is less than 75 and you're not able to increase it to 75 in the short term, then you're not going to be able to compete for the contract for this requirement because it has a minimum score of 75. Okay, haven't heard of any solicitations being issued with a minimum score requirement yet. Also keep in mind that the federal agency may find, in this case, Department of Defense, may find that your proposal is non-responsive and the assessments are subject to the False Claims Act. So let me tell you about False Claims Act. Department of Justice has already prosecuted a company for putting a false assessment in SPURS, and they were found guilty. This happened months ago. The Department of Justice has also started a new division of the Department of Justice for cybersecurity. And so this is serious. It's not important. You know, at this point, it's not important for you to falsify your assessment for DoD contracts. Department of Defense came out when they said the interim rule. They don't care what your score is. All they want to know is that you've done a self-assessment and you have posted it into SPURS. And that is needed for them to award a contract to you. So here's an example. You see a solicitation, has CUI in it. It's not COTS, and it's greater than $10,000. It's got your name on it. You submit a proposal. Other companies submit a proposal. It gets evaluated, and you win the contract. Well, let's back up one step. In order for the agency to award the contract to you, they have to go to SPURS, look up your company name, and see that you have done a self-assessment. And they don't care if you've got a minus 220 or 105. All they want to know is that your company name shows up in SPURS and that you've done a self-assessment. Okay? This also applies to subcontractors. So if you have a score in SPURS, you get awarded the contract, and you need to subcontract a portion of this out to a subcontractor, the subcontractor needs to have a score in SPURS also, or you are prohibited from awarding a contract to a subcontractor. Same rules apply to every tier in the subcontractors also. All right, so when you go into SPURS, these are the potential 9 questions that you have to answer. Number 9, probably not, so it'll be 8. So number 1 is, what is the date you completed your assessment? Number 2 is, what was your score? You know, minus 220 to 110. Number 3, the assessing scope. You're going to select enterprise if you're assessing your entire company. Number 4 is a POAM. POAM is plan of action and milestones. Completion date, the date you plan to achieve all 110 controls. So that's out there in the future. You know, you may not know how long it's going to take, and chances are you won't know, but you're going to put in a date in the future when you hope to achieve all 110 controls. That could be in 6 months. It could be in a year from now. Remember that every time you go back into SPURS to update your score, you can also change this date. So as you were identifying and reviewing
the controls that you did not meet because you didn't achieve all 110 of them, you ended up with a score of, say, 70, or maybe it was a minus 20. You go in and answer these questions. Under number 4, you're putting in your poem of when you plan to achieve the maximum 110. And you put in 6 months from now, not really knowing or not doing a thorough assessment of how long it's going to take you to meet those controls that you did not meet. So in the future, as your score improves, you can go into the poem and say, oh my gosh, I looked at some of those that I don't meet and I'm not going to get them done in 6 months. It's going to take me a year. You can go in and change that date. Okay. No hard, fast rule that you have to meet the initial date that you put in there. You can change that date as time goes on. Number 5, System Security Plan, SSP, assessed. It's the title of your plan. Number 6 is the plan title, the version, and the date. Number 7 is the date of your plan. And number 8, what's your cage code? Now, number 9 comes into effect is if you are a division of another organization. And if that's the case, then you're going to put in the higher level organization's cage code also. That's why I said number 9 may not apply to you, because many of you are your own company. You're not a division of another corporation. So 8 questions that you'll need to answer. Okay, I mentioned earlier that I would provide for you on one sheet of paper all of the cybersecurity clauses, and here they are. So actually the first 2 have been around for some time. If you had a contract from any executive branch federal agency, keep in mind that there are 15 departments of the executive branch of the federal government. You may have seen, or the contract could have included, the FAR clause, Federal Acquisition Regulation 52.204-21, and that is basic safeguarding of covered contractor information. It was last updated in June of 2016. If it was a Department of Defense contract, it would have had the second clause there, the DFARS clause, 252.204-7012, safeguarding contract covered defense information, and cyber incident reporting, last updated December of 2019. So those are the clauses that have been around. And as I mentioned earlier, it was the DFARS clause 252.204-7012, where contractors were not doing the assessment after award and reporting it to the Department of Defense. And the federal agency's contracting officer wasn't following through on the clause either, ensuring that the contractors were performing that self-assessment. So that's why this initiative started 2 years ago, CMMC. The next 2 in some shade of orange there is what you will find in solicitations and follow-on contracts for the DoD interim rule. If these 2 clauses are in the solicitation, then it is subject to the interim rule, and you will have to have a self-assessment posted in SPURS in order to be awarded a contract, whether you're a prime contractor or a subcontractor. And the last clause is the Department of Defense clause for CMMC, which we stated earlier isn't going into effect till 1 October of 2025. And the Department of Defense says they will not be putting this clause in any of their solicitations during the 5-year rollout unless the Undersecretary of Defense grants an exception, and then the contracting officer can put it in the solicitation in the following contract. So the DFARS 252.204-7012, you will not see in solicitations. What you will see now is the 2 clauses in orange for the DoD interim rule. So there are all the cybersecurity clauses on one sheet of paper that you can refer to in the future. Okay, before we get into a summary, we are at the end of CMMC and the DoD interim rule. We're at 9:30. We're on track. We got a good 30 minutes of questions and answers. So now's your opportunity to ask everything. We can dispel myths and create what is reality. All right. So what do we have for questions?
Great. Thank you, Terry. There earlier on, before you talked about the proposed rule and the status of that, there was questions about, wait, is there 3 levels or 5 levels? So can you just briefly summarize where we're at with the number of levels?
Sure. So in the presentation, we started out, DoD started out with CMMC and what now they call 1.0 a couple years ago, and it was launched with 5 levels, levels 1 through 5. 1 is basic computer hygiene. Level 5, 4 and 5 were going to be reserved for a handful of companies for which the Department of Defense hadn't identified which ones they would be. And the middle level, level 3, would be for controlled unclassified information. The proposed changes that were proposed this past November, they're now calling CMMC 2.0. One of the changes is changing from 5 levels to 3 levels. It's not into effect yet. As I said, it's going to take 9 to 24 months once they launch the proposed changes, which was last November, until they go into effect. Right now, it is in the public comment period, and there's 2 more parts to this rollout before it can be implemented. So
Okay.
The original launch was 5 levels. The proposed change is 3 levels, but they haven't gone into effect yet.
And then related, that cost estimates that you had on slide 15, that was for CMMC level 1.0, I think, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
Because the proposed 2.0, one of the requirements is that the Department of Defense is to do a price analysis and identify to the contracting community what it is going to cost to get certified at level 1, level 2, and level 3 under the proposed 2.0 changes.
Related to the cost estimate, is that just what they have to pay the assessors, the auditors? Or does it factor in the time cost of an organization, of a business to actually purchase and implement enhanced cybersecurity systems?
Right. That cost is an estimate for the 3-year cycle. Most of it will be upfront to do the assessment, maybe hire a company to help a contractor like the ones in attendance today to get ready for an audit, then entering into a contract with a C3PO, have the auditor come out, paying for their travel time and their hourly time on site, and then any other compliance costs during the 3-year cycle that the certificate is good for. So
Okay.
DoD said $1,000 for level 1, $51,000 for level 3. But under CMMC 2.0, they are actually going to do a price analysis and provide that to the supply chain contractors of what they can expect to pay.
Okay. Under the CMMC level 1.0 or 2.0, you indicated that micro purchases are exempt. Is that true? Dave is asking from Keyport, even if there's a drawing?
So if there's a drawing, it's probably going to be CUI, which is going to be under the current CMMC level 3 and under the proposed change CMMC 2.0 level 2. Anything that's got controlled unclassified information is going to be required. There won't be an exception.
Okay, so the micro purchase, if it's a $9,000 drawing, that still triggers the CUI and the requirement.
Yeah, because logically we can say that if a requirement has got drawings associated with designs or drawings, That's controlled unclassified information. We don't want those drawings released to the public, let alone North Korea, Russia, Iran, or China. All right. So it's going to get classified as CUI.
Okay. And then Trevor, I think if you could reiterate, is there a COTS exception for all these clauses? If included in a contract that contains only COTS, are they self-deleting?
Can we restate that question? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I guess commercial off the shelf is also excluded from these requirements. True or false?
That's true. COTS is commercial off the shelf. It is products. So we're talking basically supply companies that sell supplies to the federal agencies. So if an agency issues a solicitation for something that is readily available to the public, that is commercial off the shelf. The example that I gave during the class is an agency wants to purchase 10 laptop computers. A supply company goes to IBM, gets a quote, puts it in their proposal, submits it to the agency, and the agency awards them the contract. They go to IBM, they purchase the 10 laptops, and they send them off to the agency. That is COTS. Now, if the solicitation was issued for 10 laptops, but they need to be modified with some hardware and software and whatnot for that DoD agency, say the United States Navy, then that is not COTS. That is not commercial off the shelf. So the supply company is going to IBM, getting a price for 10 laptops. They get the contract, they buy them from IBM. Now the company has to modify them to meet the statement of work from the Navy's solicitation. That is not COTS. So then if it's greater than $10,000, which is the micro purchase threshold, then they are needing to do a self-assessment, post their score to SPRS. The federal agency then goes to SPRS, looks up the company, sees they did a self-assessment, and then they can be awarded the contract.
Okay. And I asked Trevor to clarify the self-deleting part of that. So if that clause, say the cybersecurity CMMC clauses are in the contract and it's a COTS contract, but everyone has agreed they should not have been included, does he still need to comply with that clause, or
No.
is it self-delete?
That's a great question. And in other classes that I teach, what I tell potential offers to do is, one, get the solicitations the first couple of days that it's issued, because in the solicitation, typically there will be a cutoff date for questions. You need to meet that cutoff date. So submit what we call a PPI, a pre-proposal inquiry, and send that question to the contract specialist or the contracting officer of the agency and ask them. Essentially what you're doing is challenging them. Say, hey, you issued this solicitation. It is for laptop computers with no changes to that. That's commercial off the shelf. Why are you putting CUI requirement in here? And have the contracting officer review that and answer the question. And if it comes back and says, no, it's CUI, and the two clauses are in the solicitation and are required, then the company needs to do their self-assessment and post it up to SPRS in order to be awarded the contract.
Great. So yeah, don't assume that the clause just doesn't apply because you think it's COTS, right?
No, because the contracting officer has, for whatever reason, did a determination and put those two clauses in the solicitation. So that means all the contractors need to conform to that. Yeah, contracting officers and contract specialists are humans. They do make mistakes, and we see that in solicitations. So what I tell and what I just said is submit a pre-proposal inquiry to the contracting officer and have them review that again and get back to you.
Thank you. Jason asks, I'm a brand new company, just literally issued my license yesterday with no facilities, no assets, currently operating in my house. In your experience, Terry, what are the major hurdles for new cybersecurity companies when seeking CMMC certification? Are there any advantages to seeking certification in this current newly formed business status? What would be my practical first steps?
Okay, so two parts to that. We're talking about CMMC and the DoD interim rule. So I'm assuming they want to do business with the Department of Defense. If that's the case, then don't deal with CMMC right now because it's in a state of flux. But regardless, even in the DoD interim rule, you're still dealing with NIST SP 800-171A 110 controls, which is used for both CMMC and the interim rule. So you're going to go through the process. If you don't meet the exceptions of cost or the micro purchase, and you may be dealing with CUI, then you'll need to go through the 110 controls, do that self-assessment, get an account with PIEE, a login and password. Once you get that, then go into PIEE, go into SPURS, record your self-assessment, answer those 8 questions that we saw earlier, and then you'll be ready to receive contracts from the Department of Defense or a subcontract from a Department of Defense prime contractor. Okay.
Great, thank you. And you had on one of your slide decks a link to Project Spectrum, and that's a contractor that's been funded by the Department of Defense to provide kind of a tool for that self-assessment. So you can create an easy account there and walk through a self-assessment tool that you can use to then upload into SPURS. So that's a handy step if you don't want to use the Excel file. It's a little bit prettier.
Right. So one thing that I didn't cover that I see here now is we didn't talk about RPs and RPOs.
Right.
Those are companies that the accreditation body has, they've gone through training, they paid their dues, they are vetted by the accreditation body. So if a company like any of ours that are in attendance today do not have an IT person, they're not IT literate themselves, have not hired an outside entity to provide IT services to them, and they want to get the controls under the belt, 110 controls, then they can go to cyberab.org and find a company that has already been vetted by the accreditation body. They can either so they go to the cyberab.org marketplace, and off the top of my head, I'm forgetting the next step there, and find RPs or RPOs. RPOs are organizations, RPs are individuals. Contact either one of them. They can help them go through the process of meeting the 110 controls and get ready for a cybersecurity certification under CMMC. They can get, scammed by emails. There are lots of companies out there saying, hey, we can come out and do an audit for you. What you need to do is go to the accreditation body's website, cyberab.org, and see if that company is listed there. If they are not, do not do business with them, because the companies that are on the accreditation body's website are the only ones that can issue certifications. And there are lots of emails flying around out there, companies saying, oh yeah, we can come on and do an audit for you. It's going to cost you X number of dollars. Do not do that. Do your homework, vet them through cyberab.org, and make sure that those companies are on that list. If not, do not do business with them. Okay.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I think a lot of its existing businesses probably have an established IT company, and you might encourage that company to look into becoming a registered practitioner, an RPO, so that they, through that process, become more familiar and can kind of add to their skill set and help you get up to speed. Or you have to hire a separate IT company that has that NIST experience and background and can get you up to speed to supplement whoever you hire now. So
And has been vetted by the
has been
accreditation
vetted.
body.
Right.
Right. So this is a burgeoning industry. It is booming. Lots of IT companies should be getting into this business because, as I mentioned early on in the class, this is just one of the 15 departments of the federal executive government that is launching this initiative. And if they are successful, all other 14 agencies are going to be following suit, and all of their contractors and subcontractors are going to need to get the certification. So there's a huge opportunity here for IT companies. And I know today that there is at least 2 people in attendance here that are IT companies. So, I mean, if they want more information, they can have a follow-on meeting with me and we can discuss it further. But it's a huge opportunity for IT companies.
Great. Thank you. Dave from Keyport is here today. He's a small business professional out there at Naval Undersea Warfare Center. And he wanted to mention that Navy Undersea Warfare Center has issued some solicitations with a minimum score on their requirements. And that minimum score, I believe, was 110. So I'm talking about the self-assessment that you upload online to SPURS. Has to have a minimum score if you're going to be bidding on some of what the Keyport office is issuing. So just an FYI on that. The other thing that Dave mentioned is that to do business with some parts of the Navy, there's a requirement to have JCP certification. And I gave the link in the chat to what that is and information on it. And JCP now requires that you have a basic self-assessment to get into JCP. So that, anyway, I don't know, Dave, you're welcome to unmute and tell us more, but did I cover it okay?
Yeah, I have a follow-on if Dave can unmute. So Dave, about a year ago, you said that NAVFAC Keyport was putting in the minimum requirement of 110. And correct me if I'm wrong, I thought I heard you say in our last discussion a month or within the last 2 months, is that you were successful in having conversations with your agency that they have eliminated that minimum score. Did I hear that incorrectly?
So you did not hear that incorrectly. So there were some, probably about a year ago, maybe even a little longer, they were putting solicitations out there. And these were solicitations that were supporting a weapons system. They were requiring at least a medium assessment. And so I was able to get that, through discussions and a lot of work to get that removed, because it really was, verbiage that stopped small businesses from restrictive language. That's what I was thinking of. It was restrictive. So then they put in that they needed 110, a basic with 110, which again, I think loses the, I don't think that's what those clauses, those DFARS clauses were saying.
Correct.
In fact, I believe the provision says, hey, if you're not in there yet, you need to put your basic in there. And like what you shared in the training today, Terry, let us know when you're going to get to 110. So I was able, so far I haven't seen anything requiring that 110 score in a while. And if I do, I will, work hard to make sure that's removed. But I do want to let people know that you will see something out of Keyport that says you are going to be required to have a basic, which to me, that's, hey, if you need to look at a control drawing, you're going to need to have a basic. So anyway, I have been successful in removing that medium, and so far successful in removing that 110 score. So hopefully we won't see those again.
Very good. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions, Stephanie?
I think I got them all. If I missed one, please retype it, or if anything new has come up. But why don't you move on with your slides, Terry, and I'll keep an eye on it.
Okay. And if I see correctly, we have 12 participants, but that probably includes you and me. So actually, we probably have 10. Is that about
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Moving on to the summary. So get started now if you think you want to get the CMMC certification and level 110 controls. And remember that that's for the prime contractors and the subcontractors, if you want to be a subcontractor. Conduct your self-assessment using, so here I'm identifying for the first time, there is a NIST handbook that you can use. It's NIST handbook number 172, or you can hire a company to assist you. Oh, so this is where I was talking earlier about RPOs and RPs. They're available now for you to hire. If you're IT illiterate like I am and don't have an IT person on your staff or have hired a company to help you, you can go to the website there, cyberab.org, and hire one of the vetted RPs or the RPOs, which RPO is the organization. Select under Marketplace, and there it is, Ecosystem Role, and select RPO or RP. And as of a couple of days ago, there are over 2,000 RPs and RPOs available to assist you. Expect to wait. C3 PAOs will be in short supply, so plan several months for delay before an audit can start. So even if you have reviewed the 110 controls, you're less than 100, you're meeting less than 110 of them, you're mitigating the gaps, and you are moving forward with getting an audit and a certification, keep in mind that it's going to take some time, even if you enter into a contract with a C3PO, before they are able to send out an auditor onto your site and conduct the audit. There's a short supply. I identified earlier how many there currently are. So there are qualified auditors now, and you can request an audit anytime. Summary continued. It must be certified at time of award. So this is a recurring question that came up over the last couple of years, is contractors were thinking that they had to be certified in order to receive a solicitation or to submit a proposal. That's not true. You only need to be certified in order to be awarded a contract or a subcontract. So get secured and stay secured. The Department of Defense wants and needs contractors. As I mentioned earlier, there are a number of federal agencies that are watching the DoD's rollout, and if successful, they are going to implement CMMC in their solicitations of follow-on contracts. But GSA has already started putting CMMC requirements in some of their solicitations. They are not waiting for the Department of Defense rollout. They have already assessed that cybersecurity is so important that they are already putting it in some of their solicitations. As we mentioned before, it applies to prime contractors and subcontractors. And once you get your certification level, put it on your capability statement. This is a huge deal, that whether you're level 1, 2, or 3, put it on your capability statement. That is important for the federal agencies to see and for prime contractors to see. And in red, I put read the solicitation to see what cybersecurity requirements are there. So on a previous slide, I provided 2, 4, 5, all 5 cybersecurity clauses in a snapshot in one place for you to take a look at. And so those are the clauses that you want to review and find in a solicitation and your follow-on contract. And lastly, if you would like one-on-one assistance from PTAC, I'm in the Olympic Peninsula, and our point of contact is James Davis. There's his phone number and email address. And if you're in the state of Washington, you want to contact the Washington PTAC organization to find a counselor in your locality in the state of Washington. And if you are in another state, you want to contact APTAC and find a
PTAC counselor in your state. And there's the 3 contacts to help you do that. That is the last slide that I have. And we are right on time at 9:58. Okay, any last lingering questions that anybody would like to ask on CMMC or DoD interim rule?
Thank you, Terry. I don't see any other questions coming in. I'm getting a lot of thank yous and kudos and appreciation for putting together this training. We will post this on the YouTube soon, hopefully this week, today or tomorrow. Any last chance here for questions?
My last comment is anybody wants any one-on-one discussion and counseling from me, I am available Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 o'clock.
We appreciate that, Terry. Yeah, PTAC is here to help you succeed in the government marketplace. And so we provide a ton of one-on-one counseling. The events are just icing on the cake. So please put us to work for your firm. With that, we'll go ahead and conclude. Thank you so much.
Bye.